2024 over 2023. For the same 12-month period, there was a 37% reduction in New Hampshire in overdose death. We went from 406 down to 270-something.
Wow.
Maine, same thing.
Yeah.
Maine, same thing. They weren't quite as drastic, but they're down something. But on a national level, it's 24% decrease, 2023 to 2024.
Right.
And New Hampshire is one of the highest.
So we've outpaced the national recovery.
Right. Now, that doesn't mean that we can't do better. There's 260 lives lost is still 260 too many.
Yeah.
And there are still as many people, if not more, using drugs today.
Right.
But they have access to things like Narcan. They have detox beds. The climate's different than it was in 2012, if you will.
Yeah.
And so we know what we need to do.
You're listening to Granted Goodness, the show about optimism, progress, and problem solving in and around New Hampshire. My name is Andy DeMeo, and today I'll be talking to Mark Lefebvre. Mark is a recovery community consultant, radio DJ, podcast producer, and author of Healing a Village, a practical guide to building recovery-ready communities. Mark and I talk about addiction across New England, his journey from suffering himself toward helping others, his work across governments, communities, and countless lives to help people heal from drug addiction, what makes him optimistic about this issue, and many other things on this episode of Granted Goodness. I hope you enjoy it. Mark Lefebvre, welcome to Granted Goodness.
Thank you, Andy.
I am really excited to have you here. For many reasons, like we've been talking since the moment you walked in. You are a super interesting guy. You have a long and very interesting career doing a million different things. You know who you remind me of? Have you ever heard of those, the Redwall books?
My son used to be absolutely enthralled with them.
Yeah, they're amazing. It's like mice go on adventures and stuff. And the guy who wrote those, I think is a British dude, Brian Jacques. I was always enthralled by his biography in the end. It was like Brian Jacques has been a truck driver, a radio DJ, and a children's book author. So just like this really eclectic thing. Yeah. And when I came across you for the first time and I saw that you were also a writer and you've written a book about baseball and community and now addiction and healing, I was like, this guy's just like Brian Jacques. He's super interesting.
He's probably sold a few more books than I have, but
hey,
anyway,
this is gonna be your big break. It's the Granted Goodness, optimism in New Hampshire.
Well, I appreciate you having me in.
Yeah. So give us the 10,000-foot view of, this book or your work or engagement with it. Like, why'd you write this book?
I wrote the book. We were talking a little bit about how cynical our communities or, folks of Gen X, Gen Y, millennials, even boomers such as myself.
Yeah.
How cynical we get because all we get spoon-fed is what's wrong and what's bad.
Right.
And this book is about what's good. Mm-hmm. And so I'll start there. This book is about hope. It's about what's good. And it's about a little community, i.e. Portsmouth, New Hampshire, that could. Yeah. And what I mean by that is that there is an amazing army of volunteers, professionals, medical providers, municipalities, and so forth that have all come together in this community to address the challenge that addiction has on not only individuals, but families and certainly communities.
Yeah.
And so with addiction and community is kind of the backdrop. I am a person in long-term recovery,
right,
coming up on 13 years.
Oh, congrats.
And, I was working for 37 years in the high-tech space, the last 22 of which as a marketing executive at IBM, complete left-brain stuff.
Yeah.
Achievement, politics, measurement, outcomes, pressure, sales, more, growth. And it crushed me.
Yeah.
And I succumbed under that pressure when I got out of the hospital, and we can get into the details as a follow-on question, but there was nothing in the Seacoast or New Hampshire for me to turn to.
Right.
And I'll talk about, the experience I had when I was discharged from the hospital versus where we are today in this great capacity that we've built in the community here
Yeah.
in New Hampshire, the Seacoast, and across New England and across America to address the challenge of addiction for individuals, families, and community.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what I love about, and thank you for sharing that just now. Like, so many compelling parts to your story, and many of the reasons I wanted to really talk to you specifically about it, right? Like, I've not touched addiction. Again, this is kind of an issues-oriented podcast. We try and bring a perspective of optimism, problem solving, right, to like all the things that people can think of. And the beauty of it is like, I learned so much, I can't even begin to imagine like all the things that people are doing to make the world better, and then they come and they educate me. But, when you think of New Hampshire or New England specifically, right, and you think of the problems that we're facing, like this to me is the whopper one. It's the one that is, I think in many ways, it's the most deeply personal. It's incredibly tragic. It's really hard and complicated to, think of how do we make this better. And, when you hear people say stuff like anyone can become an addict, right? Like what a prototype, like high achieving, tech person, like all these kind of type A qualities, that you exhibit, it happened to you, right? And so that's like point one of like, wow, what a good example. And the fact that there actually has been progress.
A lot of progress.
Right? Progress on an issue.
Progress.
Right. It's just, it's not intractable, but people, all my life, right? I'm 29, I'm about to turn 30. I guess as I've been coming of age, this has always seemed like just the thing, that people, you don't talk about it unless it's happened to you. And like, so really curious how the landscape has changed.
Yeah, sure. No. And, I'm glad you share with me your age, because that would be perhaps that and COVID, two of the most important events or issues that are going on surrounding you. We all have friends. We all have relatives. Some of us ourselves are dealing with addiction.
Yeah.
I challenge anybody to look left or right, up or down, and not find somebody who's been impacted by the opioid crisis.
Yeah.
Ironically, it's alcohol that kills way more people than opioids do.
Right.
But that's generally accepted because as a society, we tend to drink, and there's less stigma around that.
Right.
Until
we're
it's
here
abused.
in a bar.
Yeah, and here we are in a bar. No problem whatsoever, by the way. So anyway, I guess my point here is that it is a profound issue in your lifetime and also in my lifetime, because when I was your age and even younger, all of my rock heroes were dying from heroin overdoses.
Wow.
It was heroin. Vietnam War veterans are coming back with heroin problems.
Yeah.
Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin. You can go down the list.
Right.
And I challenge you to find heroin anywhere in the United States right now, because it's been completely taken over by synthetic fentanyl.
Wow.
There's no heroin, zero, almost zero. It's undetectable. The Department of the DEA, it's a fraction of a fraction.
Wow.
And that's because of the supply of very cheap and easily accessible fentanyl. And a dose of fentanyl, I think it's something like 2 milligrams or 0.2 milligrams. It's a ridiculously small number, like a handful of grains of salt's worth could kill a 200-pound person.
Wow.
And that's how dangerous it is.
Oh, my gosh.
So that's why we felt an urgency to do something. But my only point here in terms of how pervasive it is, it's pervasive. It's in the news. There's a lot of great work that's going on across the country.
Yeah.
And to be part of that is really a rewarding experience.
Yeah. Well, it's a fascinating topic because I think you can look at it in any number of directions, right? Like even the scale of the problem, right? And the scale of, some of the things that have been tried, whatever level, right? Like people talk about the war on drugs all the time, whether as like a great failure of, or whatever lens people want to bring to it. Yeah. It was, I don't even know.
It's in the book too. It was a tremendous failure because what we did was we criminalized and used the drug war as an excuse to put people of color in jail and feed the industrial jail complex.
Yeah.
I know that sounds cynical, but the facts speak for themselves.
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, it happened. I'm not gonna dispute that. Like you know far more about it than me. And again, optimism to me, it's not about like, it's actually like, I want to look the problems in the face, and there's some ugly stuff out there like this. And the drug thing to me it's the ugliest thing that exists in many ways because it's linked to all these nefarious things, like these giant pharma companies that people are like, you're not prescribing this drug responsibly. There's, the cartel issue, which is like you can't make up something more messed up than a drug cartel. Like it touches all the most like evil things you can think of in this really personal way. And so to look at that whole issue and come away with it with any sense of like, how do we make this better is kind of an incredible thing.
It is. And one of the things I'll even qualify what you said, the United States, it is primarily a U.S. problem, although many other countries have similar problems, but not on the scale of the U.S., not by a long shot.
Yeah.
The United States has somewhere around 3.5 to 4% of the world's population.
Yeah.
We consume 88% of all pharmaceutical and non-pharmaceutical opioids in the world.
Oh my gosh. I would
Think
not
about
have
that for a
guessed
second.
That's a lot.
Yeah. So my point here is there's some things that are going on either within our culture, within the access, the supply, our proximity to Mexico and Central America.
Right.
There's a whole host of different reasons. But one of the things that I try to highlight in the book is that addiction and alcoholism are largely tied to mental illness and untreated childhood trauma.
Yeah.
ACEs, adverse childhood experiences.
Yeah.
And so as we move upstream to try to, decrease the demand for illicit drugs, we need to take a hard look at the root causes as to why it's happening in the first place, which is prevention.
Yeah. I mean, that speaks to like another dynamic of it. Like, and I want to see where these things intersect, right? Because like, writing a book is no joke. And you've written another book about, baseball and community, which, is a very cheerful topic, but it, and it's in Massachusetts, like a lot of the books, about Massachusetts.
It's about growing up in the 60s and 70s and how idyllic it was and how safe it was and how democratic it was. We got to make our own decisions on the playground with no parental interventions.
Right.
Which bred people who grew up and did great things in life.
Yeah. Well, it's like getting away from, the helicopter parenting
of which I raise my hand. I mean, I'm one of them.
Yeah. Well, I think sometimes there's an overcorrect. Like everyone tries to overcorrect for the mistakes of their parents, right? Of like, I was given too much freedom, so I'm going to give my kids structure. Yeah. And then they say, I've got too much structure, I'm going to be freedom. These things almost intersect in your head.
Well, the way they intersect in my head is through my lived experience. I'm the common thread through both books.
Right.
And, in some regards, my first book, which is called A Place and Time, and it's community, youth, and baseball. Yeah. And I self-published that book, and it was originally about growing up in the 60s and 70s, like I said, where
like the Sandlot.
we rode our bikes to. I mean, our playground was an open field in a cemetery that we used it so much for baseball that there were base paths worn out in the grass. Right. And nobody had to call anybody else. It was always a game on in the summertime. Yeah. To the point where the neighborhood ice cream truck would actually stop there for us, and way off the beaten path.
That's so great.
But in addition to that, the original emphasis for that book was to celebrate a feat that has only been repeated once. So I'm from Leominster, Massachusetts. Yeah. And Babe Ruth Baseball, our all-star baseball team, won the Massachusetts State Championship 3 years in a row, 71, 72, and 73. I was on the 73 team. Wow. It was only repeated once, and that was again by Leominster in the 90s. Yeah. And it'll never happen again because there's no real, Portsmouth is a really great exception to my statement that there's no real town baseball. Sure. But the seacoast of New Hampshire and other parts of New Hampshire, it's thriving, and I commend the volunteers and the parents and whoever made that happen. Yeah. My point was, originally it was a book to celebrate those. It was a 50-year anniversary. Yeah. And I called all the former surviving players. Oh, wow. I interviewed, out of 37 surviving players, I interviewed 28 for the book. They're all in it. And I did a profile of each one in terms of where they grew up, where they went to high school, what they did after baseball. So I tracked them down. Yeah. And it was just a love story to my hometown. Yeah. This book begins to some degree where that left off, where I experienced a lot of childhood trauma in the form of not violence in the home per se, but I saw there was death that I experienced at a very, very young age, and I put it in a box and thought I could forget about it. Right. I lost a brother at a very early age. Wow. And that impacted me. And then, a lot of things destroyed my family dynamic growing up. And so I had all of this unresolved childhood experience that allowed me to use tools that were very useful in hiding my addiction.
Right.
Until it didn't.
Yeah.
I mean, things like lying, manipulation, lying by omission.
Right.
Isolation, these things, because as a teenager growing up, I was protecting myself.
Yeah.
And they worked until they didn't.
Yeah.
And so as a result of that, I got into alcohol and drugs at a very young age. And I thought I could put it down. And in the middle of, my 40-year marriage, it raised its ugly head again.
Right.
And I succumbed to OxyContin and alcoholism, and it almost killed me twice.
Wow.
So that's why I have lived experience, and that's the common thread that stitches the two books together. If you will.
While you were reaching out to all these, friends of yours, from your youth that you knew doing baseball, and you got to see like what they're doing in their lives, like, were you struggling with addiction at that point, or was that like before?
No, I wrote that book 3 years ago. I published it 2 years ago. So I've been clean and sober for almost 13 years. So no, I had a very clear head. But back in the 70s, if we were playing American Legion baseball, there was no bus.
Yeah.
And so we'd pile into cars. We were all 17, 18, 19 years old. And, for the ride home, we'd have a case of beer in the trunk. And, we did all kinds of crazy things. It's amazing that in our case, nobody got hurt.
Everyone says that.
Right? And so, no, at that time, but, there were a lot of things that we did together as a group, and most of us grew out of it.
Yeah.
And the ones that didn't are no longer with us, ironically.
Man. So some people, they go through the experience of writing a book and they're like, I hate that. I'm never doing it again.
I get a few more. I got a few more in me.
Yeah. You seem like the type, which is a good thing in my view. So like, you're writing this book about, this one, like this collection of seminal, amazing, experiences from your youth and, the legacy of that in your life and their lives. Like, are you thinking of all this other stuff too in the background of like,
no.
I know I've got something to say about
this
addiction.
was a complete pivot.
When did that happen? How did that happen?
Well, I retired. I took early retirement from IBM in 2017 with full retirement benefits, which gave me an enormous amount of freedom.
Yeah.
And I was able to work for nonprofits. In 2013, when I was studying for a master's degree in community mental health and substance use at Southern New Hampshire University, I did a project on peer recovery and using Indian healing circles as kind of an example of a no shame, no stigma way for somebody to come forward who may have betrayed his family, her family, the tribe, and they put them in the center of a circle, and the circle would celebrate them.
Wow.
And they call them healing circles, tom-toms and music and so on, and chanting and so forth.
So this is a thing that like,
it still exists today.
Yeah.
It still exists today, but they do it in my powwows.
Yeah.
And I said, well, I don't really need a master's degree to do what I really want to do, which is to bring peer recovery to the Seacoast. So my wife and I and a woman by the name of Sandy Coyle founded Safe Harbor Recovery Center in 2014, and it opened in 2015.
Yeah.
And I talk extensively about that in this book as well.
Yeah.
So a group of us got together with other people, and we made that happen. I went back to work at IBM, and I was absolutely dying.
Right.
And I said, no, not after tasting, the other social service stuff. I decided to take the early retirement. I worked for a number of nonprofits between 2017 and today. And just real quickly, Southern New Hampshire Services, I ran a 3-year statewide grant on, we called it New Hampshire Works for Recovery. The New Hampshire Works program are all the NAGS offices around the state, employment security, where you go to when you get laid off and you need some help. We participated in that, but with an audience that was specifically focused on individuals and families impacted by the opioid crisis.
Yeah.
We provided them with credentialed training. We provided them with job searches, and we did all kinds of things in that regard. So I built this capacity in myself on workforce development.
Yeah.
I participated on the initial Greater Portsmouth Recovery Coalition, which it wasn't originally called that. It was called the Portsmouth Coordinated Response to Substance Use.
Yeah.
And I ran as a volunteer, not as part of my job, but I ran the workforce development. We called them, what do we call them? There were committees, but we called them task forces.
Yeah.
And there were 5 of them. So I ran that one. And eventually I went to work for Pine Tree Institute, which was the facilitator for the coalition. And we brought Recovery Friendly Workplace to the state of Maine. Pine Tree Institute won that contract.
Yeah.
I also eventually ran the Greater Portsmouth Recovery Coalition as the co-facilitator for the whole thing.
Yeah.
So I built up all of these experiences of community forces and resources and initiatives that raised the capacity level to the point, as we talked very early, where what wasn't existing when I got clean and sober in 2012 is in abundance. Not necessarily enough,
right?
But there are places, and if there's no capacity, there are places that you can get referred to.
Right.
So with all of that information and all of that work experience, I said, there are other communities that probably don't know how to start.
Yeah.
They don't know how to start, and then I'll give an example. I've got some work that I'm going to be doing in Raleigh, North Carolina.
Yeah.
I've got some work that I'm going to be doing in Connecticut, where communities have come forward and said, we've tried this.
Right.
And we failed miserably.
Yeah.
Please come help us.
Right.
And that's this book here, Healing a Village, is a practical guide to building recovery-ready communities. It includes tools, resources, step-by-step experience of what we did in Portsmouth, lessons learned, why do they fail? All the things that we learned, get it out there and share it so that other communities have a place to start.
They must be grateful for that. And how cool to have like a blueprint almost, right?
Yeah, it's exactly what it is. It's a blueprint.
Yeah. So in writing this book, like, what do you know now? Like, again, because I'm fascinated by like, where do people stumble in this process, and what specifically like did you bring into existence that wasn't there before, right? If I'm an addict, right, and it's 20 years ago, and I live around here, like how might my experience in attempting to seek recovery be different today, right?
That's a great question. Yeah. I think, well, first the first part of that question about what did we learn?
Yeah.
We learn by making mistakes.
Yeah.
I mean, I know that's kind of trite saying that, but it's absolutely the truth in our regard. So the things that we learned in terms of what constitutes a couple of really key things, and the book will get into a little bit more deeper, but number one, you need to have a separate coordinating, facilitating organization outside of the sectors that are participating on the coalition. Because if it's everybody's job to run the coalition, it's nobody's job.
Sure.
So the facilitator keeps the thing moving forward, documents the meetings, sends out the agenda, collects all the different things that we did, communicates to the outside world, makes sure that all the task forces are up and running and have what they need, create a repository up on a Google Drive or Dropbox or whatever so everybody has access to it. And making the experience of participating on the coalition a growth experience. So that it's not just, I got another thing I volunteered for and I got to do this and that. No, it's a growth experience. And it's something that you're going to want to put on your resume that you participated on this. So number one, have a separate organization that can coordinate. The second key important thing is, and it's probably equally as important, if not more, is to have a common sense of urgency on one issue. Climate. Addiction. Teen mental health. But a sense of urgency. We have to act now, and this is the thing that we're going to act on, and we're not going to be distracted. Now, we can pivot to adapt to how things progress, but we're not going to suddenly go from solving an addiction issue and go and deal with the number of people dropping out of high school. It's just So I think having a coordinating organization, number one, and having a common purpose or a common sense of one key issue, a common sense of urgency. Those are the two things that I think were the biggest takeaway from my experience.
Well, avoiding the mission creep, so to speak. I think that can trap a lot of people. Mission-oriented work. And
that's where the facilitating organization, because they're not going to hurt anybody's feelings by saying, no, we're not going to do that. We'll do a group conscience and raise, everybody, let's talk about this.
It's a funny thing. Like, it's not an answer that you would expect necessarily, right? Of like, actually, if you're going to try and mobilize a community to help, deal with addiction better, you really need to, like, it's all these other parts I'm sure matter very much, right? Like, we need to be more empathetic. We need to be less judgmental. We need to, get some money to, pay people or get facilities or something like, but you're saying, no, actually, really, it's just, you need to be organized in a particular way. Like it's kind of a bureaucratic issue, and someone has to take that on. Otherwise you're going to be running in circles.
Almost, and then you talked about, funding. So the way the facilitating organization Pine Tree Institute worked for the Greater Portsmouth Recovery Coalition is that we had continual financial support to provide just enough facilitation to keep the thing moving forward. There was no waste. And that's one of the challenges that we had, because there are grant cycles that are out there that you need to apply for grants. If you don't get that one, you're going to go get this one. But Pine Tree Institute, they don't do this work for free.
Yeah.
So they have to pay for a professional a facilitator or a leader to kind of keep things moving. And there's overhead that's associated with that. So we were very grateful and lucky that the city of Portsmouth, the area Rotary, Foundation for Seacoast Health, New Hampshire Charitable. We had a number of anonymous people step forward and write checks. And the coalition right now is in its 5th year of operation without any funding, because it's now ingrained into the fabric. It's muscle memory for the community of Portsmouth to do this work.
Wow.
And what Pine Tree does now, I used to work there, whether it's on a quarterly or I think it's every other month. In fact, it's this afternoon after this, I'm going to dial into the Zoom, is they have a check-in.
Yeah.
And members of the various sectors that are participating in the coalition come forward and say, okay, this is what I've done over the last 30 days and so forth.
Yeah.
This is what we found. This is where we need help. So-and-so over there, you guys may have struggled with this particular issue before. We schedule some time together? So the muscle memory and the culture of the Portsmouth Recovery Coalition goes on, even though Pine Tree, as a full-time facilitator, has stepped back.
Right.
And so that's capacity.
Yeah.
That's what a recovery-ready community is. We've got harm reduction. We've got treatment centers. We've got recovery centers. We've got workforce development. We've got housing. We've got work around stigma reduction, healthcare, coordination, handoff, access and transportation, all of these different challenges and barriers that existed in 2012 when I came in the door, when I came out the door, I should say, they exist now, but it's not a special thing.
When did you start to realize that, this is working? We're moving the needle on this in a way that's noticeable, maybe replicable, and we want to really document it. When did that feeling really start to manifest?
We documented it from day one. The book provides phase one, pre-phase one, phase one, all the way to where we are today over the last 5 years.
Yeah.
Step by step, who participated on those coalitions, what role they had, what did we learn, what do we take forward to recommend to the next phase. That's all in the book.
Yeah.
There were 2 incidents in particular that come to mind that made me say, aha, we got this, and we're making a difference. Number one, we were able to open a second sober living home in Hampton, New Hampshire. And that was a direct result of the coalition, because at that time we only had 12 beds for women in all of Rockingham County. We opened an 8-bed, we found the funder, an operator, and a property owner, and brought them together and facilitated that effort. And we ended up having 12 beds for men at the time.
Yeah.
The second one is when our great Department of Public Health Director, Kim McNamara, said, we want harm reduction in the city of Portsmouth.
Yeah.
And she knows what harm reduction is. Harm reduction, for those that don't know, is meeting people where they're at. If they're not quite yet ready to put usage down, that's okay. We're going to be there for them to help them and prevent them from harming themselves. And what does that mean? And protecting the community from harming itself. Yeah. That means trying to address transmission of infectious diseases, through safe needle exchanges. Yeah. Things like safe sex kits, things like Narcan distribution, and there's a whole host of other things. So people think of harm reduction, they typically, the trope is we're just replacing one drug with another. Well, no, we're not. Yeah. What we're doing is we're keeping people alive so that they have another chance to see their kids, their family, and maybe make another decision tomorrow that they're going to enter the continuum of care of recovery. Yeah. And she stood up and said, we want this in Portsmouth. Not only did she want it in Portsmouth, she had her whole staff trained on how to do Narcan and how to change the conversation from harm reduction and the stigma that's associated with it to what we call overdose prevention. Yeah. Harm reduction is overdose prevention. And there's a figure, I believe there was something like 14, I might get the amount of zeros wrong. It was either 1,400 or 14,000. It's in the book. Yeah. Narcan reversals in the state of New Hampshire in 2023. That was 1,400 or 14,000 family members that got to see their loved one again.
Wow. Yeah.
that got to see their loved one again.
I mean,
Think
it's
about that
like
concept.
you can think of the number, but like
Yeah.
what you really can't. I mean, the moments, the joy,
Yeah.
being there. Like it's 14,000 lives of
Right.
people they know.
And so I guess those are the two situations that came forward that said we're making a difference.
Right.
I
Yeah,
mean,
this matters.
The climate's changing, and it continues to change.
Yeah. I mean, I've started to see, very, like I try and do a little roundup of positive news, good news. That's like substantive, because people they have this notion of good news.
You want to hear some good news? Some really good news.
Yeah,
And
I mean,
it's in this topic.
I've seen there's been there's some reductions, right, in deaths and
In 2024 over 2023 for the same 12-month period. I don't know if it's July to June or if it's January to December. There was a 37% reduction in New Hampshire in overdose deaths.
That sounds like a lot.
It's a lot when you're talking 300 or 400 individuals.
Right.
We
Yeah.
went from 406 down to 270 something.
Wow.
And Maine, same thing.
Yeah.
Maine, same thing. They weren't quite as drastic, but they're down something. But on a national level, it's 24% decrease, 2023 to 2024.
Right.
And New Hampshire is one of the highest.
So we've outpaced the
outpaced
national
it.
recovery.
Right. Now, that doesn't mean that we can't do better. There's 260 lives lost is still 260 too many.
Yeah.
And there are still as many people, if not more, using drugs today.
Right.
But they have access to things like Narcan. They have detox beds. The climate's different than it was in 2012, if you will.
Yeah.
And so we know what we need to do.
Yes.
We know what we need to do, and it's also we know we need to spend a lot more money in prevention in dealing with some of the root causes that I talked about earlier.
Yeah. Well, you had mentioned tropes earlier. You said the
Yeah.
trope is this, and I'd love to hear what misconceptions about drug use and recovery from substance abuse do you find yourself correcting most often in people?
Language.
Yeah.
Addicts, druggies, losers, failures.
Yeah.
Potheads, hopheads, that type of thing.
Yeah.
I think a lot of it is NIMBYism as well.
Sure.
And so everybody supports recovery housing as long as it's not next door.
Yeah.
Where the data shows that crime and things like littering and so forth in the neighborhood actually decreases.
Right.
Because these guys are active in their community. They're paying taxes. They have jobs. They're reunited with their kids. And they do community service like sweeping the streets and picking up all the fall leaves and everything and
Right.
spring cleanups, and they get involved. So the data is there that recovery homes are actually good for a community.
Yeah.
So there's some work to do there around NIMBYism, and NIMBY being not in my backyard.
Yeah.
And so I think language, NIMBYism, and educating people who don't have a nefarious ignorance about what we're dealing with. And by nefarious, I mean they just don't want to change. They have their preconceived notions and prejudices that maybe they were brought up with in their families. And
Sure.
you're not going to change their minds, period,
Yeah.
dot. However, there are a lot of people out there that once you inform them,
Yeah.
especially with evidence-based content,
Yeah.
minds are changed. And that's one of the things that at the height of the coalition, there were, I think, something along the lines of 25 to 30 organizations represented on the coalition in the greater Seacoast and greater Portsmouth area,
Yeah.
from which there were over 75 members of the coalition, whether it's a steering committee,
Yeah.
they were formally on the coalition, they're on one of the task forces, and they get involved. And so it had some stickiness to it where people were calling us and saying, hey, how can I help?
Yeah.
That type of thing. And that's largely due to the fact that, the language and the stigmas change. It's safe to come out and participate in something like this.
Yeah. Oh, it's funny. I think the language thing, it can get a bad rap some of the time, right? Because, I think it's smart to focus on because language is downstream from culture, right? Like it says, whether you think, oh, that guy, he's a pothead, he can't do anything, he lacks capability, blah, 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 right? Like we say these things, we grow up with these things, and I think it's easy to kind of poo-poo saying, no, we should talk about these things differently because it's just like, well, it's just a word. What the hell is that going to change, right? But it does matter,
Yeah, it
right?
does matter. And I'll tell you why it matters, because that prevents people from getting housing, that prevents people from getting jobs, that prevents people from getting social services, and it prevents people from in some cases, because there are medical professionals out there that still don't get this, especially in rural parts of the country, rural parts of New Hampshire and Maine even, that don't want to be dealing with this.
Yeah.
And so when language and culture prevent somebody from their American rights to seek work, to seek shelter, to buy groceries, to get prescription drugs, to participate in community activities, if they're marginalized as a result of that language and that stigma, that's I think, in my view, that's a crime.
Right.
Secondarily, and number two, that's where language and stigma can really come back to haunt you.
Yeah. If you could talk to yourself or even your team of people, like at the beginning of the forming of the coalition, right, the Seacoast Coalition, with all the knowledge and experience, and I'm sure like this is essentially like what you've done in the book, right? But like you're there, Mark from today is talking to Mark from 13 years ago or whatever. What would you say to him in terms of like, here's some advice. Here's what's something you wish you knew.
Thanks for sticking around.
Yeah.
And what advice? I would say,
or what do you wish you knew earlier? I guess.
Yeah. Let me answer both of them. What I wish you knew, and then what do I tell them? I would say
no lottery numbers.
Yeah, by Apple.
Yeah.
I would say keep plugging away, because the end of the story has not yet been written. Because we faced many barriers. We faced many walls. We faced many, no, you can't do this. And we did it all.
Yeah.
And we're still doing it all. Now, that doesn't mean that we couldn't do better. I mean, there are certainly some areas, we don't do a good job of helping the homeless.
Right.
We don't do a good job of equalized mental health, physical health, and substance use disorder treatment and healthcare benefits and insurance coverage.
Yeah.
That's not something that you can necessarily solve. That we can advocate, but
Right.
we can't solve. We can elect leaders. So
Yeah.
I'd say keep plugging away. What do I wish I knew then that I knew now? I'd say that I wish there was a blueprint.
Yeah.
I wish we didn't have to be the ones to start it.
Right.
I wish somebody else had written this book
Yeah.
in 2012.
Right.
It'd be a very different book than today, but I wish we had this.
Yeah.
And in many cases, there are places across the state that are where we were.
Yeah.
Not to the degree that we were, maybe 12 years ago, but there's pockets of places in the United States where recovery is a way of life. Palm Springs, California is one of them. That's where Hazleton is, Betty Ford. Hazleton, that's where I had to go to treatment. Not at Betty Ford. I went to Michael's house. But on any given day, there's probably 25 culturally appropriate 12-step meetings and non-12-step meetings that you can go to. There's intensive outpatient. There's partial hospitalization programs.
Yeah.
There's probably 50 to 60 recovery houses in that greater community. So Palm Desert is one of those areas. There are several others that are popping up. Now, that means there's a lot of grant money that's flowing there. And,
Right.
there's a center of gravity there. It's a lot easier to do what we did here.
Yeah.
There.
Sure.
It's much more difficult to do it here.
Yeah.
Because we're starting from scratch. And we're doing it organically, grassroots at the community level, which
Right.
is why it's so sticky.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure that's probably like, I imagine that your book in many ways will be more helpful to a lot of people, not to, the people in Palm Springs or whatever, like they're great, but it's a very different conversation, I imagine, to be like, hey, I'm in, Coos County, New Hampshire.
Yeah.
I live in a town and I know there's, opioids everywhere, right? Like that's not the same as.
Yeah, and then half the people don't have access to a caregiver.
Right.
And so we got to bring the care to them.
Yeah, exactly. Like how do you tailor the most difficult set of conversations imaginable, to different communities and different places. And you kind of answered this question, but like I want to just ask you point blank, right? Like, you got early retirement, you seem like you got a happy, interesting life. Like why did you write this? But like, why do all this? You could just go sitting on the beach.
It's a really easy question to answer.
Yeah.
I'm not done growing. I'm not done learning. And I'm not the type of person that could sit by a lake with a beer in his hand and just check out like my parents' generation did by large.
Yeah.
And so as long as I'm learning and meeting interesting people and surrounding myself with kind people, I can do this stuff forever. Like I said, I've got a couple more books in my head.
Yeah.
That when the time comes, I'll start putting pen to paper again. But yeah, I'm not done learning. I'm not done appreciating what's around me, and I'm certainly not done growing. And there's a lot of things that I'm still curious about.
Oh, I love to hear that. All right, give me a sense of how optimism, right? Like, because it is a topic that I try to address in every episode of the show, right? Like, why was that important to you? I've seen in all the promotion for the book, like, this is a book about hope, right? Were you always comfortable with that language?
No, absolutely not. There were a lot of moments where personally I felt hopeless, and
how'd you get to here then?
How did I get to here? By talking about it.
Yeah.
So not isolating. The opposite of addiction is isolation.
Uh-huh.
And I'm sorry, the opposite of addiction is connection.
Right.
And by that I mean, so I made myself known. I got involved in the community. I was allowed to speak my truth. I have a very supporting family. I worked at a place that allowed me to be the person who I am.
Yeah.
So when I say the book is about hope, it's in the context that individuals, so think of a three-legged stool of individuals, families, and community. There's hope for the individual in that now there's a capacity within many communities, such as the greater Portsmouth area, that have the resource to basically do the things that weren't there when I came out. Secondly, I think the hope is for families.
Yeah.
Because there's increasingly number of programs that are out there for families. And I'm not just talking about things like Al-Anon.
Yeah.
I'm talking about like Safe Harbor, for instance. They have programming for families. A lot of mental health, Seacoast Mental Health and others, they have family programs.
Yeah.
When I went out to Palm Springs for my own treatment, they had a family day. So, and it's not come out here to forgive the person who did you harm.
Right.
It's to come out and learn about the disease of addiction, how it affects you.
Yeah.
And then with the community, there's hope because now there's a coordinated effort to have the entire, what I call the continuum of care, from prevention to treatment to harm reduction to recovery support within the community, so that there's multiple entry points for individuals and families for the community, the three-legged stool, to connect into that continuum and get the help that they need. And the hope is for others that haven't done it yet,
right,
to be able to start using this as a guide.
Yeah. Yeah. You've talked a little bit about how, the city of Portsmouth has been, really helpful. Like, people raise their hands, here in nearby communities saying, we want this work done here. We want this. But, there's no shortage of examples, as you said, of the government at different levels just royally messing up how to improve the issue of, addiction and drugs, right? So I'd be curious, just as like an open question, in what ways do you think that the government, whether it's the federal government, the state government, the municipal governments, what ways do you want to see them doing the things that they haven't done? What's the role of the state government, the local government?
Well, the states of New Hampshire and the state of Maine have been very, very fortunate. I got to give props to the first Trump administration, because out of that and the courts that were there came the settlement funds from Purdue. And also from the other drug manufacturers, as well as the chains of pharmacies and so forth. And that money was very quickly channeled to the states. So big props for that.
Yeah.
The governor of New Hampshire, Governor Sununu at the time, he is the architect of Recovery Friendly Workplace, which is now being implemented as a nationally recognized program.
Wow.
So he started it with a group of individuals. Ironically, it was funded out of the grant that I talked about when I had that New Hampshire Works for Recovery program. The seed money came from that. That said, he was the architect of that. Now, I think there's something like 32 states in the country that are implementing Recovery-Friendly Workplace.
Right.
Pine Tree Institute, where I worked, we brought it to the state of Maine. Pine Tree has that Maine contract, 3-year contract. And so the state, and Governor Mills is holding her 7th annual opioid summit this summer. And bringing together 12 to 1,600 people on an annual basis to do workshops, so the support is not just financial. The support is giving us the air cover, speaking the language, bringing parties together, advocating for us in Washington, advocating for us in in Concord or Augusta.
Yeah.
So the government plays an important role in the tone. Some of the things that I think I'll just in the spirit of complete transparency, I'm seeing some recent talk about separating or unequalizing mental health and physical health in terms of access to health care and so on and so forth. And that is a little bit of a disturbing thing, so we'll have to wait and see how that plays out. But my point here is setting the tone, providing the air cover, submitting opportunities for nonprofits and other community-based organizations to participate in grant money, and locally and state level, just be involved. It's being involved. And when I say the city of Portsmouth, we're talking the mayor, we're talking city manager Kennard, we're talking Kim McNamara, police chief, fire chief, Department of Housing, Department of Welfare, and all of them have played a significant role in participating in how this thing shaped out.
There's a book that just came out that is super fascinating. It's called Abundance, and it's similar in the idea of like, hey, we've gotten kind of used to government not working particularly well. People they're used to hearing things like, oh, the permitting alone is going to take 10 years, so it's like blah blah blah, and it's just like it doesn't have to be that way. And they give examples of there was this bridge that collapsed in Pennsylvania, and the governor made a big thing of it. He was like, normally this would take like years to do. We're going to do it in like a month or something. And as you said,
they had to open the interstate.
Right. Yeah, exactly. They had to break all the rules. Like they had to break the law, or they had to like invalidate all these laws to actually like get it
all
done.
The dereg.
Yeah. Right. Which is kind of an indictment of like the system that exists, but common to all these successes that they can point to, which are not the norm, is this sense of urgency.
Yeah, tragedy or exactly.
Right. Yeah, from every level at like the architecture of government. So again, I'm biased. This is it's kind of like New England adjacent, but granted, New Hampshire. I love hearing these stories most of all, where it's like, actually, here's a way in which, New Hampshire, yes, we have a big addiction problem, but we are also leading the country in solving it, right? And it's not an accident. It doesn't just happen. It's
a lot of work, a lot of reasons, and a lot of people, unfortunately, losing their lives along the way. Yeah. And if you can't have a sense of urgency around that, I don't know what you can.
Yeah, what is urgent? Yeah. What could possibly be more urgent? All right, Mark, we've been going for 50 minutes. I want to give you the opportunity, like if there's anything that you wanted to really make sure that you covered in our conversation that you feel like we haven't covered yet.
Well, just with regards to the book, it's going to be available on June 10th in bookstores everywhere, so you can order it through your bookstore. It'll be on bookshelves such as Barnes & Noble and all the independent bookstores that normally carry this type of book. I'm also selling it from my website. If people want a signed copy, they can go to www.healing-a-village.com. Yeah. And there's a form that you fill there, and I'll mail you within 3 days a signed copy of the book.
You got a truckload of them.
I got a truckload of 800 of them that I'm bringing up to the aforementioned opioid conference that's coming up in July from Maine. The state of Maine bought 800 copies to hand out to the first 800 registrants for their event.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And I'll be speaking up there as well.
Did you self-publish this book? Or
no, this is published. Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Two things. First of all, this was published through Peter E. Randall Publishers right here in Portsmouth. So it's a great
why'd
team.
You go with them?
Deirdre Randall.
Yeah.
Because I wanted, this is my first, they were gentle with me. No, I'm serious.
Yeah.
They were gentle with me because I have never been through the process of working with a publisher before.
Yeah.
And so I was learning along the way. I trusted them. They thought the book was a great idea and that they would take a chance on it. So big props to Peter Randall Publishing and Deirdre Randall, who is the current CEO, and Eric Ott, who designed this wonderful cover.
It's very cool.
Yeah. So
raising their hand.
Yeah. People. Oh, I should put it over here.
Yeah.
You see it on the website. So Eric, if you're ever listening to this podcast, which you will, because I'm going to tell you about it, big props to you as well. He did it pro bono.
Yeah. Oh, I love it.
Yeah.
I love it.
Everybody wanted to have a piece of it. So
yeah. Did you, like, when you pitched it, like, my friends of mine work in publishing. Like,
Yeah.
was it on spec, or did you have like a fully fleshed out vision?
I had a whole proposal, including I had a table of contents that I had proposed. I had
And they were like, we got
books
to
to
have
compare it to.
Yeah.
My lived experience played a big role.
Yeah.
Because not anybody, but a lot of people can write a book using all the academic stuff. And I wrote the book purposely not to be academic.
Yeah.
It's practical. And it's
Right.
not only practical, it's relatable because my story is woven through the whole thing in terms of my experiences of every step along the way.
Yeah.
And so it's a working knowledge. So, but it was a formal proposal. I followed the format that's suggested on, various online templates and so forth.
Yeah.
I got to know Deirdre Randall through some work at WSCA, and she said, "Yeah, I'll take a look at your proposal." And she called me a couple of weeks later. She says, "Can you meet a spring 2025 deadline or, go to market?" And I said, "Yeah." And she said, "Well, that means the book's going to be done and in my hands by November 30th. So that gave me another 6 months to finish what I had started and be more disciplined about it. But it all came together.
Sounds like it did.
Yeah.
I'm very glad for it. All right, Mark.
Homegrown story, homegrown publisher, homegrown cover.
What does Live Free or Die mean to you?
Oh, wow.
You don't have to answer from Massachusetts.
I'm not a black and white person.
Yeah, you don't
So
seem
for me,
like it.
it's not live free or die.
Yeah.
It's live free responsibly and thrive.
Yeah.
And that's what that motto means for me.
Right. No, I like it.
Live free responsibly and thrive.
Doesn't fit on a license plate though.
No, but Scurvy Dog does.
Yeah.
It's got
I'm glad you have that because it's my personal mission to like make New Hampshire the national leader in vanity plates.
Yeah.
I don't think we are like by capita, not by absolute. I think we're number 3. I think like Virginia.
Is that right?
Yeah, we're not number 1,
Huh.
which is upsetting. Like we should be leading in this way. All right, Mark, are you an optimist?
I am.
Why?
My children.
Yeah.
Yeah, my children. I see the future through their eyes.
Thanks so much for taking the time to talk to me today.
Appreciate it.
This
Thanks,
has been
Andy.
really great.
This has been awesome. I love doing this.
Hey there, thanks for spending some time with us, and I hope you enjoyed the conversation. You can learn more about today's guest and how to get involved with or support their work in the show notes. If you'd like to suggest a guest for the show or have any story tips for our Good News in New Hampshire newsletter, shoot me a message at hello@granitegoodness.com. Music for this episode was provided by the band Sneaky Miles, who hail from Newmarket, New Hampshire. Until next time, I'm the creator and host of Granite Goodness, Andy DeMeo. Thanks for listening.